My wife's family staged an intervention about my drinking problem. I don't drink, but they needed me gone. I walked into what I thought was going to be a regular Sunday dinner at my in-laws' house, and instead found myself sitting in a circle with my wife's entire extended family staring at me with these serious, concerned faces. My wife was sitting across from me, not making eye contact, and her mother was holding some kind of pamphlet about addiction recovery. The whole scene felt surreal because I genuinely had no idea what was happening. Her father cleared his throat and started talking about how they'd all noticed changes in my behavior lately, how I'd been distant and moody, and how they were worried about my drinking. I sat there completely confused because I barely drink at all, maybe a beer with dinner once a month if that. I tried to interrupt and explain this, but they kept talking over me, sharing stories about times they'd supposedly seen me drunk or smelled alcohol on me. The weird part was that none of these stories were true. My wife's sister talked about how I'd been slurring my words at their cousin's wedding 6 months ago, but I remember that night perfectly. I had a migraine and was exhausted from working overtime all week. Her brother mentioned finding empty beer bottles in my car, which was completely made up because I don't even buy beer to keep at home. I kept trying to defend myself, getting more frustrated by the minute, but every time I spoke up, they'd exchange these knowing looks like I was just proving their point about being in denial. My wife finally spoke up and said she'd been finding evidence of my drinking around the house, bottles hidden in the garage, and the smell of alcohol on my clothes when I came home from work. This hit me like a punch to the gut because not only was it not true, but my own wife was lying about me to her family. I looked directly at her and asked her to tell me specifically what she'd found and where, because I knew she couldn't give me real details about something that never happened. She got defensive and said she didn't need to prove anything to me, that my denial was just making things worse. The intervention went on for almost 2 hours, with different family members taking turns sharing their concerns and reading from printed materials about alcoholism. They had clearly planned this whole thing in advance, complete with research about treatment options and a list of local support groups. The level of preparation was honestly impressive, considering it was all based on a complete fabrication. What really started to bother me was how specific some of their accusations were. Her uncle mentioned seeing me drinking in my car outside their house before coming in for dinner, which never happened, but he described the exact spot where I usually park and even mentioned the color of the cup I was supposedly drinking from. These weren't just general concerns, they were detailed, specific lies that someone had clearly coached them on. I finally stood up and told them I was leaving, that I wasn't going to sit there and listen to false accusations about something I don't even do. My wife's mother started crying and begging me not to leave, saying that walking away was just proving I had a problem and couldn't face the truth. The whole family started talking at once, some of them getting angry, others trying to be supportive and understanding. My wife followed me out to the car and broke down sobbing, saying she was scared and didn't know what to do anymore. She begged me to just try the counseling they'd found, said it couldn't hurt even if I didn't think I had a problem. Something about the way she was acting felt off, though, like she was performing rather than genuinely emotional. I drove home in complete silence, my mind racing trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. I'd been with my wife for 8 years, married for 4, and her family had always been pretty welcoming to me. Sure, we'd had our differences over the years, but nothing that would explain this kind of coordinated attack on my character. That night I couldn't sleep, so I started thinking back over the past few months, trying to remember if there were any signs I'd missed. My wife had been acting differently lately, more secretive about her phone, staying out later with her friends, being less interested in spending time together. I'd chalked it up to work stress and the normal ups and downs of marriage, but now I was wondering if there was more to it. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day going through our house, looking for any evidence of these bottles my wife claimed to have found. I checked every inch of the garage, went through all my clothes, even looked in places where I'd never put anything. Of course, I found nothing, because there was nothing to find. I also started paying closer attention to my wife's behavior. She kept checking her phone constantly, would step outside to take calls, and seemed nervous whenever I was around. When I asked her about the intervention, she stuck to her story about finding evidence of my drinking, but couldn't give me any specific details when I pressed her. The breaking point came about a week later when I overheard her on the phone in the backyard. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but I was in the kitchen getting a drink and heard her talking through the open window. She was telling someone that the intervention hadn't worked like they'd hoped, that I was still denying everything and refusing to get help. What really caught my attention was when she said she didn't know how much longer she could keep this up, that it was harder than she'd thought it would be. Then she mentioned something about needing to move to the next phase of the plan, and that's when I realized this whole thing was some kind of setup. I quietly moved closer to the window and heard her say that her family was getting impatient and wanted to know when she was going to file for divorce. She mentioned something about needing to establish a pattern of behavior first, and that the drinking accusations were just the beginning. My heart was pounding as I listened to her plan out how to destroy my reputation and our marriage. The next few days were torture. I had to pretend like everything was normal while knowing that my wife was actively plotting against me. I couldn't confront her directly because I needed to figure out what she was really up to and why. I started paying attention to every interaction we had, every conversation, looking for clues about her real motivations. I also started documenting everything, taking photos of our house to show there were no hidden bottles, keeping track of every time I left the house and where I went, even started recording some of our conversations on my phone. I felt like I was going crazy, but I knew I needed evidence if this was going to escalate. The strangest part was that my wife seemed to be getting more frustrated with me as the days went on. She'd make little comments about my attitude or behavior, like she was trying to provoke me into doing something that would support her narrative. When I stayed calm and didn't react, she'd get this look on her face like she was disappointed. About 2 weeks after the intervention, her brother showed up at our house unannounced. He said he wanted to talk to me man to man about getting help for my drinking problem. I invited him in and offered him coffee, and we sat in the living room having this completely surreal conversation where he was trying to convince me to admit to something I'd never done. He kept pushing and pushing, getting more aggressive when I wouldn't play along. Finally, he stood up and said he was worried about my wife's safety, that alcoholics could be unpredictable and violent. That's when I realized what they were really trying to do. They weren't just trying to make me look like a drunk, they were trying to paint me as dangerous. I told him he needed to leave, and he got right up in my face, saying I was proving his point about being unstable. I stayed calm and walked him to the door, but I could see he was trying to bait me into some kind of physical confrontation. After he left, I immediately called a friend and asked him to come over as a witness, then called my wife to tell her what had happened. My wife's reaction was telling. Instead of being concerned about her brother's behavior, she seemed disappointed that nothing had happened. She made some comment about how I must have misunderstood his intentions, and maybe I was being paranoid because of guilt about my drinking. Even when I pointed out that I don't drink, she just gave me this look like she thought I was pathetic. That night, I couldn't take it anymore. I confronted her directly about the phone conversation I'd overheard, about the intervention being planned, about her family's coordinated lies. At first, she tried to deny everything, but when I kept pressing, she finally broke down and admitted it. What she told me was worse than I'd imagined. She'd been having an affair with someone from her work for almost a year, and she wanted out of our marriage, but she was worried about the financial implications of divorce. We'd bought our house together, had joint accounts, and she was concerned about having to split everything equally. Her family had helped her come up with a plan to make me look like an unfit husband so she could get a more favorable divorce settlement. The drinking accusations were just the first step. They were planning to escalate to claims about emotional abuse, financial irresponsibility, maybe even infidelity on my part. They figured if they could build a strong enough case against my character, she'd be able to keep the house and most of our assets. The level of calculation was breathtaking. They'd been planning this for months, with her family members taking notes about my behavior and looking for ways to twist innocent situations into evidence of problems. Her mother had even researched local divorce lawyers and was prepared to testify about my supposed drinking problem. I asked her why she hadn't just asked for a divorce honestly, and she said she'd worked too hard to build the life we had together to just walk away with nothing. She felt like she deserved to keep everything because she'd been the one putting more effort into our relationship, even though she'd been cheating on me for a year. The conversation lasted until almost sunrise, with her going back and forth between apologizing and justifying what she'd done. She kept saying she never meant for things to go this far, that she just wanted to protect herself financially, but her family had gotten carried away with the whole intervention idea. I told her I wanted her to call her family and tell them the truth, to admit that she'd made up the drinking problem and that their intervention was based on lies. She refused, saying it would be too humiliating and that they'd never forgive her for dragging them into her mess. Over the next few days, I had to figure out what to do with this information. I was angry, hurt, and felt completely betrayed by the person I'd trusted most in the world. But I also felt this strange sense of relief, knowing that I wasn't going crazy, that my perception of reality had been correct all along. I started putting together my own evidence, the recordings I'd made, documentation of the false accusations, proof of my wife's affair that I'd discovered once I started looking for it. I realized that if she was planning to divorce me anyway, I needed to protect myself legally and financially. The hardest part was pretending like nothing had changed while I figured out my next move. My wife seemed to think our conversation had cleared the air and that we could somehow move forward together. She was still planning to end the marriage, but she wanted to do it gradually, maybe counseling first to make it look like we'd tried to work things out. I couldn't stand the idea of playing along with her charade any longer. I contacted a lawyer and started the divorce process myself, filing papers before she had a chance to implement whatever her next phase was supposed to be. I also sent copies of the evidence I'd gathered to her family, letting them know exactly how they'd been manipulated into participating in her scheme. The fallout was immediate and intense. My wife was furious that I'd taken control of the situation and ruined her carefully laid plans. Her family was mortified to learn they'd been lied to and had participated in what amounted to a character assassination based on complete fabrications. Some of her family members reached out to apologize, genuinely horrified by what they'd done. Others seemed to blame me for not just going along with the divorce quietly, like I should have been grateful for the opportunity to end a marriage with a cheating wife who'd orchestrated an elaborate scheme to destroy my reputation. The divorce proceedings were ugly, with my wife trying to salvage some of her original plan by making various accusations about my behavior during the marriage. But I had too much evidence of her deception and infidelity for any of it to stick. Her lawyer eventually advised her to settle quickly before more details about her affair, and the fake intervention became public record. I ended up keeping the house and most of our joint assets, since she'd essentially forfeited any moral or legal claim to them through her behavior. The irony wasn't lost on me that her scheme to cheat me out of everything in the divorce had resulted in her getting almost nothing. The whole experience left me feeling like I'd been living with a complete stranger for years. The woman I'd married, who I'd trusted with everything, had been capable of orchestrating something so elaborate and cruel without showing any signs of remorse until she got caught. Looking back, I can see there were probably warning signs I'd missed or ignored. Her family had always been a little too involved in our relationship, and my wife had always been focused on appearances and what other people thought. But I never imagined she'd be capable of something so calculating and manipulative. The fake intervention haunts me sometimes, not because I believed their accusations, but because of how easily people can be convinced to participate in someone else's lies. Her family members, who I'd known for years and who had seemed to genuinely care about me, were willing to confront me about a serious problem based solely on my wife's word. I've learned to be more careful about trusting people completely, even those closest to me. I still believe most people are fundamentally good, but I've also learned that when someone has strong enough motivations, they can justify almost anything to themselves and others. These days, I'm rebuilding my life from scratch. I've got the house, but it doesn't feel like home anymore. Too many memories of feeling like I was going crazy, of being gaslit by the person who was supposed to love me most. I'm planning to sell it and start fresh somewhere else. I've also learned to trust my own instincts more. When something feels wrong, it probably is, even if everyone around you is telling you otherwise. That intervention taught me that sometimes the people claiming to help you are the ones you need to be most wary of. The experience has made me more empathetic to people who talk about being gaslit or manipulated in relationships. Before this happened, I might have wondered why someone would stay in a situation like that, but now I understand how slowly and subtly these things can happen, how easy it is to doubt your own perception when people you trust are telling you something different. I'm not bitter about it anymore, mostly just grateful that I found out the truth before things went any further. My wife could have kept up the charade for years, slowly destroying my reputation and my sense of reality while planning her exit strategy. In a way, that overheard phone conversation was the best thing that could have happened to me. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never heard her talking about the plan. Would I have eventually started to believe I really did have a drinking problem? Would I have gone to counseling and been diagnosed with something I didn't have? The thought of being slowly convinced that I was losing my mind is terrifying. I'm dating again now, but I'm definitely more cautious about getting too serious too quickly. I find myself paying attention to inconsistencies in stories, watching for signs that someone might not be who they seem to be. It's probably not the healthiest approach to relationships, but it's better than being completely naive. The whole experience has also changed how I think about family dynamics and loyalty. My wife's family was so willing to believe her and participate in something so elaborate without questioning whether her story made sense. It makes me wonder how many other family interventions or confrontations are based on partial truths or outright lies. I've kept all the evidence from that time, the recordings, the documents, the timeline I put together. Not because I think I'll need it again, but because sometimes I still can't believe it all really happened. Having proof helps me remember that I wasn't imagining things, that my reality was valid even when everyone around me was telling me otherwise. In the end, I suppose I should thank my ex-wife for showing me who she really was before we had kids or got even more financially entangled. The fake intervention was cruel and manipulative, but it was also incredibly revealing about her character and her family's willingness to participate in deception when it served their interests. I'm in a much better place now, both financially and emotionally. I've got a new appreciation for honest communication and genuine relationships, and I'm grateful for the friends who stood by me during the whole ordeal. Some people might say I'm lucky to have escaped that situation, but I think I created my own luck by trusting my instincts and refusing to accept a false reality, even when it would have been easier to just go along with it.